Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Chris Hattingh. Let's get into our first news story of today, and this is something that I think has been in the air in the commentary space for a little bit, particularly in the mainstream press. We discussed it a little bit last year, but it's worth another look at. And it is crystallized by this article in The Economist today, titled "The Case for Optimism in South Africa." And the subheading is, "After a lost decade, economic prospects may be brightening." So this article, and I'm just going to quote bits from it here, it talks about how South Africa has been through a very difficult period. Quote, "GDP per person is lower today than it was 20 years ago. Over that time, South Africa has fallen from 27th to 39th in the rankings of the largest economies, overtaken by the likes of Bangladesh, Thailand, and Israel." However, they begin to talk about how there are signs of an optimistic case for how South Africa has, quote unquote, turned a corner. And I'm quoting here again, "The optimist case begins with state-run firms such as Eskom. In 2022, economists from Harvard University ascribed about 40% of South Africa's underperformance since 2008 to a failure of utilities, which, like other state entities, were looted under Jacob Zuma. Better, newly appointed managers at Eskom have cut the number of days with blackouts from 284 in 2023 to just 8 last year. The widespread adoption of rooftop solar power has also helped as well." It quotes a number of analysts who say that there's more going on and that some of this is the success of Operation Vulindlela, which is the president's reform task team, which is the support of many large organized businesses. They hype up here, for example, that Eskom is lifted the generation cap in 2023 on how much power could be produced by private producers, and that there is, quote, "a new independent transmission company means that soon electricity will be traded on an open market." Well, if you were listening to the show the other day, you will know that that's not quite happening as envisioned originally. They say that these changes have caused an investment boom and that developers are considering 220 gigawatts of potential renewables and battery storage projects, which is 4 times Eskom's installed capacity, although they note that not all of these will be built. They talk about changes at Transnet, the opening up of some 11 private rail operators onto the Transnet system, the deal to privatize the Durban port. They talk about spectrum auctions, which have increased mobile coverage and reduced data costs, a reduction in the backlog of work visas, and the Public Service Amendment Bill, which this characterizes as professionalizing a civil servant's stuff with ANC cadres. They do, however, caution that all of this is A, little bit slow, and B, that with changes to the GNU, which could happen when the ANC changes its leadership, it's very possible that all of this could collapse and the ANC could then go into a power sharing agreement with the EFF and MK. So, Chris, what do you make of this? This is, I think, a pretty good succinct summary of the optimist case. And as I alluded to in reading from it, there are some problems with it. Like a lot of these things here are kind of about to get going or expected to deliver soon, but haven't quite got there. We have improved our fiscal position a bit, right? We've actually got a surplus in the medium-term budget policy statement. That's something, and a lot of these are good moves, but I don't know. Things are a bit slow, I think, and as this correctly notes, it's very fragile. What's your take on the optimist case?
I think it's quite a managerial or sort of technocrat assessment of things, and that it rests on the assumption that if you can just get some of the processes right, if you can get the right skilled people in the right positions, then the cascading effects will be quite positive, and you could get a bit of growth going. You could then get more investment from public and private sector. You could get, if the fiscal situation continues to stabilize and possibly improve further, you get lower interest rates, which means businesses and consumers can spend more, they can take on more debt. But that's very Yeah, it's very consumption focused. There's not to me sufficient focus on the fixed investment side of things to get that right. So in infrastructure, in your heavy plant equipment, your machinery, those assets you can't take out of a country. It's one thing to be optimistic about the stock exchange and to buy shares. You can sell those quite easily. It's another thing to invest real capital into a country. And for that, you need your security of property rights. You need relatively crime-free, or at least you need to know that crime and corruption are held to account and punished without fear or favor. And also just on the how the public service conducts itself, how tenders are awarded. You need as little as possible in terms of perverse incentives. So that comes down to the issue of BEE and affirmative action. So those core deep policy questions and politically sensitive issues, those I don't see being addressed. So if all the success rests on the GNU and the GNU is out in 2027 after the ANC elective conference, is it real reform that's been going on, or is it just trying to sort of cover gaping wounds with duct tape and just make sure we stay afloat? We're benefiting from this latest commodities boom. The rand is below 16 to the dollar. That's all great. But then once the GNU is out, these reforms also then go out the window. So I guess time will tell, as always, exactly if it's sort of high road or low road. But for the time being, I'm more skeptical, I guess, than either optimistic or pessimistic. It's just I don't yet see it in the data to justify it. Keep in mind, between 2012 and 2023, we averaged 0.8% growth. So for us to buck that consistently, I think is going to take real work and long-term work. So a few quarters of GDP uptick doesn't tell me South Africa is these core policy and ideological issues are being addressed and resolved.
Yeah, it's worth saying, I mean, I think that particularly on load shedding, I thought it would take us much longer to get out of the problem, and I thought it would get worse after the sort of high point in what is it, 2023, 2024. I thought that we would recover much more slowly from that, but thankfully we at least managed to sort of stem the bleeding on that one, and I think that's kind of things here. We're not on the up, but we have sort of, for now, prevented us sort of continuing on the rapid decline. If we get, I don't know, what is it? What's the latest estimates for economic growth? Sort of 1.8%, something like
1.4 to 1.6. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. even my cautious optimism is being crushed.
That does. I mean, that triples our growth rate from 2024. So
yeah. So
relative to where it was, it does, and it possibly then matches population growth. So.
Right, exactly. So that in and of itself, I think, tells the story. That's exactly it. Is sort of stemming the bleeding. That's not good enough, I think, because the country risks, running out of, as you say, the positive winds that are sort of lifting us with all the geopolitical turmoil going on in the rest of the world, everywhere from China to the US to Europe. There's, I think, a potential opportunity here for us to kind of become like a safe harbor, and we're just not there because exactly all of these policy changes haven't really been made. So any one of the things here that's referenced, they quote in the Economist story, the head of a large investment fund worries about the quote Mexification of South Africa, and that's what they mean by that is the capture of so much of politics and state institutions by organized gangs. And unfortunately, that's something we've we've seen that it's been growing for a long time, but it's really burst out into the open recently. And we'll talk about it in the next story, but the Madlanga Commission is just revealing that this is a huge problem. It's completely pervasive. It's not just at the low levels. It sort of seems to stretch its tentacles all over security apparatus, which I think is just losing legitimacy almost by the day. And that's not we just need to change a few policies here or there and that will come right immediately. That's going to be a issue we deal with, I think, for at least a decade, even if we start doing the right things right now. So yeah, I think that too should be cause for concern about how things are going. Any final thoughts on this one from you, Chris?
I guess just on that last point, sort of as the ANC is guaranteed to decline further, I mean, last year in 2024 with the elections, President Ramaphosa, he polled more positively than the party, and they still dropped from 57% to 39%. If he's out in 27, well, he should be, in all likelihood will be. No one else comes close to him in terms of popularity. So they're on the way down, and I guess it's how the ANC is carved up now. So if you're in these sort of networks, these mafias, you're trying to identify those opportunities that you can get some who might be in the top echelons of the ANC, which will be one of the bigger parties after 2026, 2027 into 2029, but not the biggest party. You're trying to figure out like how you incentivize, how you carrot and stick approach to make sure that they're in your camp, and that behavior and those incentives just continue there.
Right, exactly, because it encourages more patronage and more sort of internal focus. Just on that note, I was watching a feedback on the ANC's Lekgotla that has been given by Fikile Mbalula today. And what was interesting in his feedback was when someone brought up this allegation that he had interfered in the Joburg regional contest inside the ANC. He spent far more time talking about that, and it clearly really animated him. And he was denying all the accusations and getting really upset about it and saying that people were making up nonsense. And he talked about that. He kept repeating himself over and over. He talked about that for like, 4 times as long as his answer to any other question. And I think there in of itself lies the ANC's problem, is that it's just, it's going to be so consumed by internal stuff that I don't think we're going to see really big changes going forward. Okay. Our next story. In a statement issued today, President Cyril Ramaphosa has instructed the South African Police Service to establish a special task team to probe people identified by the Madlanga Commission for investigation. This includes 5 senior South African Police Service members and 9 City of Ekurhuleni municipal officials who were all named in the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry's interim report, 3-month interim report, as having prima facie evidence of being connected to criminality in some sort. So it lists these various people. KwaZulu-Natal Hawkshead, I think, is one of them. Julius Mkhwanazi, who is the head of Ekurhuleni Metro Cops and was linked to Vusimuzi Kat Matlala. 3 members of the EMPD, that's the Ekurhuleni Metro Police Department, who form part of a SWAT unit which Mkhwanazi headed. Various other officials. Chris, this seems like a good development. As long as obviously they properly follow through with the investigation and it's not just, an attempt to cover it up. Also, I think the real concern here, though, is firstly, this is certainly can't be the end of it. There needs to be a lot more. There'll be many other figures implicated in this rather. And secondly, I do fear that what might end up happening is you might see a sort of factional bias. We know that, for example, in the South African Police Service, there are various factions that are at war with each other. I think that's kind of what started all of this off in the first place. And if only one faction is purged, then we're not really solving the problem of the sort of systemic rot. What's your take on this?
Well, maybe the one faction will be slightly better, maybe more efficient. So there won't be as much waste than the others. Look, yeah, I think timeline-wise, this is a good development, given that the commission was established last year. Now already the sort of task team is being formed. It does run into
by our low standards, that's pretty fast.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to say, it does run into the South African phenomenon of sort of dealing with things by task teams and commissions and compromise and negotiation. And that is to say that nothing then really happens. So just kicking for touch again through these different kinds of entities that are formed. I also wondered, just in terms of sort of tactics, so let's assume this is all correct and maybe it leads to even further steps, sort of going after bigger fish, as it were. Why communicate it so publicly and name the individuals? Are you trying to tell them, to incentivize them to, rat out others? I'm not sure exactly why you're sending this particular message by communicating the name so clearly. Perhaps you're also trying to show, you are still in charge, and you are going to deal with those who are sort of either acting against you and your own corrupt interests, or you are doing this for the right reason. So I'm just a bit unsure about that. Also because you link it to the inefficiencies and issues of the SAPS, of other law enforcement agencies, of the National Prosecuting Authority. Yeah, where is the reason to think that this might turn out differently than some other cases that have high-profile cases that have come up in the last 5 to 10 years after state capture?
There was another amusing thing in that Fikile Mbalula report back. He answered some sort of question on this announcement by the president, and he basically said, "Oh, don't worry, we're not going to do like we did with the Zondo Commission." And it was sort of an admission that they had slow walked it. As Fikile so often wanted to do, he kind of implied basically that, don't worry, we're not going to mess this up like we messed up the Zondo Commission response.
No, but Nick,
was
they
not
didn't
his
mess it up.
intention, I'm sure.
They were diverted. Someone else, it's never the ANC's fault when anything goes wrong.
Yes.
It's
It was sort of by implication, he kind of sort of implied that the ANC had completely cocked up on the Zondo Commission.
Oh, fair. Okay.
Funny. Anyway, Fikile is very good at occasionally saying things that are so sort of outrageous or honest that they kind of they amuse me. Anyway, so yeah, once again, we're sort of talking about kind of small potatoes here. The problem is very big. The number of people implicated is much bigger. There needs to be more. Needs to be a lot more. There needs to be more action on this stuff. But considering what we're used to, I think this is better than the worst case scenario of absolutely no one being named and the report just being buried and we all just are expected to move on. I think it's been too dramatic, too public. And so the presidency feels like it needs to at least do something, even if it's not, close to fixing the whole problem. Okay, let's move on to our last story here. So Eskom has really been trying to irritate me recently. We had the story from the other day that this whole unbundling of Eskom and to create this separate transmission unit, it was promised by the president in 2019. It didn't take place, I think, until last year when they signed the papers. And then Minister Ramokgopa is trying to basically sort of almost strangle this entity in the crib by keeping it partially under Eskom's control or not letting it have any of Eskom's transmission assets, having to basically start its grid from scratch, which is just a complete waste of time, because what's the point then of unbundling? But there's another scheme which is kind of irritating, and this one kind of made my blood boil from this particular line. I'll just quote from the story from News 24. Eskom says it's optimistic that a revenue gap created by the incentivized price offered to ferrochrome smelters will be funded, but it cannot yet share details of the size gap or where funds come from. It is, however, adamant that the burden will not be placed on Eskom's other customers, suggesting it is optimistic that the fiscus would pick up the tab. The fiscus having to support Eskom again. So what's going on here? Eskom has put forward a plan to NERSA to give a preferential price to a group of ferrochrome smelters who are not doing so well. These smelters have become unprofitable due to rising electricity prices, due to Eskom's mismanagement of the system. And they're hoping to give them a discounted price of 87 cents per kilowatt hour. Although they'll also have to do other things like potentially starting up some other coal stations and coal mines temporarily, because in order to become profitable and sustainable, the smelters need 62 cents per kilowatt hour to actually work. So in other words, this price won't even fix the problem. Eskom said that it needed to do this because the impact of losing a key customer would be catastrophic. We acknowledge the impact cannot be pushed onto other customers. So as much as the situation is dire and so many jobs are at risk, an alternative solution had to be sought. The application has to be made on the basis it would not impact the rest of customers. We don't know how much extra this is going to cost, but estimates put it at somewhere just under 10 billion rand per year. Chris, the sunk cost fallacy, it's an important thing in human psychology. It's this fear that people have that if they've contributed something towards an effort, if it doesn't pay off, even if it doesn't make any sense, they will keep contributing and contributing just in the hope they can turn things around no matter how bad things get. That's what Eskom is doing here. It sucks if you have to if you have to let the ferrochrome smelters go bankrupt. That's terrible. But the alternative is what? To keep this going forever, to keep just feeding and feeding these things while the fiscus, which is just barely trying to turn the corner on things, is expected to basically bail Eskom out again. How long do we have to wear the weight of Eskom around our necks before we actually begin to solve this problem? We're never going to fix the rest of the economy. That's, of course, what this all leaves out, is that every rand spent on propping up these smelters on Eskom and Eskom by extension is a rand that could have been given back to the people of South Africa, given back to the businesses through tax breaks, through, I mean, I don't like subsidies, but you could, in theory, give it to subsidies to some other industry, lower prices, etc., etc., etc. No, we have to keep the ferrochrome smelters going. And we promise we won't punish the customers. We'll just punish the fiscus. Okay, that's an even smaller group of people, I guess. But in some ways, but I'm going to lose my mind. Sorry, Chris, your thoughts. Bring some sanity here.
No, I'm not going to help and make your frustrations any less. I think I might make them worse because I'm also very frustrated. I guess two things. So number one, this assumes that if you can find the money to support these smelters, that you could then generate somehow the demand, that there is demand for this, for their products and for the electricity, which there isn't in the economy.
Sorry, one more thing from that story. Someone says, oh, don't worry, we'll just cover any potential costs that the subsidy of this electricity thing will do by taxing any chrome exported. And it's like, okay, so we're going to subsidize the manufacture and then tax the export. I mean,
you go back to the story from The Economist about this potential turning of the corner. But then we've got this is the proper example of minute micromanagement of an economy. So you can support these companies because you can somehow artificially stimulate demand, and then you can still export and you can get the revenue from that because you're taking ideas from now the great tariff regime that is being imposed on the world, because you're going to take ideas from there. So it all is just economic fallacies across the board, failures of economics 101. And at the end of the day, it comes back to hurt South African consumers and businesses the most. I haven't heard Eskom in any over the last 20 years, as things have been declining. I haven't heard them express concern about losing customers, but now they're concerned about losing these specific customers. What about all the households that have gone off grid, that have been driven off Eskom by electricity price increases and also by just unreliability, by trying to invest in solar and other forms of self-generation? None of these things are addressed. So this just continues that vicious cycle, and it is deeply frustrating because it does show that there are green shoots here and there. There's some reasons for optimism. You've got your money departments like National Treasury, the Revenue Service. We don't like them, but they're efficient. And others in the government who are trying to sort of capacitate things and manage them. And on the other hand, you've got these continued push for ideas that just make the whole fiscal situation all the more difficult and untenable. That hurts South Africa in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. And, the story of so much of our governance of recent years has been making these kind of short-term plans. Oh, we'll just keep this going for a bit. We'll keep this going for a bit. Sometimes you just have to bite the bullet. And if you invest wisely and you make good decisions, you don't have to make these impossible, difficult, painful choices. But that's not an option. We squandered those opportunities, so we have to make the difficult choices now. And I think the difficult choice in this case is Eskom has to be, as much as possible, to prevent the total collapse of the economy, slowly but surely cut loose, to prevent us being dragged down. Now, if you do that too quickly, you're going to cause more problems than you're going to fix. But this seems to be exactly going in the wrong direction, right? We're going to more subsidies for this, more special customers for that. And the mining industry, by the way, is also not happy about any potential export tax that could be put on the chrome anyway. So
Of course.
you're going to have to fight another whole battle if that's your solution to try and fix this problem, assuming it would raise enough money in the first place, which it might not. Just
Nick,
as you say.
Sorry, Nick, just on that point of trying to micromanage the economy, this is also in Business Day today. So the CEO of BMW, he was talking to media yesterday on Wednesday outside the company's headquarters, BMW headquarters in Midrand. And he talked about the auto master plan. I mean, we've got so many of these master plans. And he said, and I quote, when the master plan was created, we had very different assumptions for South Africa's economy and trajectory ahead. So we expected a much stronger domestic market, which hasn't come as we expected it. So like in the auto industry, one of the darlings of South African sort of localization master plan policy, that not working. But this one, don't worry, this bailout for the ferrochrome guys, that's going to work because the demand is going to be there.
Yeah, no, just very frustrating stuff. If we had a deregulated economy with low taxes, with working infrastructure, with this and that, we could probably get by with some of these smaller things, right? It's like, okay, well, this is slightly inefficient, whatever, but we have enough kind of growth and juice in the system that that we can kind of carry ourselves through. But in the current situation, no, this is just creating a problem that we're going to be talking about in a few years going, oh, well, we need a bigger subsidy, or we have some other new problem with this and it's costing the fiscus. No, I think this is not good stuff. Okay, that's all we have for today. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you found the show interesting. We will be back tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show for the live show at 1:30. Cheers, everyone, and have a great day. The Daily Friend Show and the Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR. Or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us button.